Oh man, two of these things. What is wrong with me this weekend? Well, nothing actually, just blowing off the chores. But yeah, here I am back on the microphone for one last discussion before I actually begin the darn chores, which I really should be doing right now, but, you know, chores are chores, they get blown off. I wanted to, this is almost but not quite a vlog too, because it's got an update in it. I want to talk about broadband, because the big news of the last several days is my dad finally has broadband. Finally! In the year 2016, about 10 of us or so on Facebook were telling him, welcome to this century's internet. And it's an interesting story, but it's also a cautionary tale for what exactly is wrong with broadband in the United States. And simply, it's too expensive. We all know that. But we've never really, has anyone ever really fleshed out why, besides comparing the U.S. to other countries like Stop the Cap does, which I highly recommend, by the way, stopthecap.com. Follow that blog. Link will be in the description. If you care at all about fast, affordable broadband, or net neutrality, or anything related to any of this stuff, if you aren't already, you should be a regular reader of that blog. No questions asked. Go over there right now, add it to your RSS reader, stopthecap.com. Or let's go all 90s and say bookmark it. But yeah, stopthecap.com. Now, about what happened to my dad. So, he was a stalwart holdout on AOL dial-up for the longest time. We've had the discussion that tech-savvy folks and their not-so-tech-savvy relatives may have about today's internet technology. Numerous times, I was Mr. Punching Bag, listening to his complaints about how slow dial-up was. So many times, over so many years. Actually, too many times, over too many years. And then, we had a lightning storm, because of the heat wave is bringing with it some more extreme thunderstorms than usual here in Connecticut. There was a loud boom at his house, and the folks suddenly had trouble getting dial tones when making calls, and they couldn't use dial-up modem. The dial-up modem suddenly couldn't see any kind of dial tone whatsoever, so thinking the modem got zapped by a lightning strike, my dad stopped by the Geek House, and we gave, I offered to let him come up here and get all the broadband updates and those huge Windows 10 updates that absolutely cannot be downloaded over dial-up. Because Windows 10 is more cloud-based, it is not dial-up friendly, and sadly, even though you can bandwidth limit connections over Wi-Fi, you can't flag dial-up connections to not automatically download updates like you can with metered connections over Wi-Fi. So, little oversight, but a rather legacy oversight in terms of Windows 10's design. But Windows 10 is not dial-up friendly in the least. My dad was telling me lots of nasty stories about how sometimes it would take him 10 minutes just to open an email, because the minute he went online, Windows 10, if it had updates, would go crazy with what little connection it had. Plus, he uses WebRoot, which is cloud-based security software, so those updates were cloud-based, ongoing, being kept in sync, and all that lovely stuff. So again, broadband-focused software. And he was trying to use dial-up with that sort of thing. Needless to say, it didn't work out very well at all. Then came the lightning storm, and some storm damage that made it somewhat difficult to get a dial tone and killed dial-up modems. He brought the computer up here. We gave him his I gave him his updates. I downloaded everything for him, and found out, of course, that the modem was perfectly fine. He took it back, nothing. Which by extension probably means that a fax machine would not work at that place either. So there was damage to the copper network. He calls the phone company blows him off. You're calling us on a phone. That must mean your line is fine. So, yeah. Not good. But this is to be expected with phone companies and copper networks, as phone companies try to run the copper networks into the ground and in some cases seek legal justification for dismantling them in more Republican parts of the country. But basically, landline phone networks are pretty much blown off. So basically, he he couldn't get anybody out there to repair the lines. So he managed to. He should have brought up that it took him a few tries to get a dial tone just to call that in over the landline network in the first place. But they were like, "Oh, you called us on a phone. You obviously can make calls. You're all set." Something along those lines. So, finally, he bit the bullet, and he went to the local cable monopoly because he's too far in the woods to have any phone company alternatives. This is the part that doesn't make any sense. Why would the phone company, Frontier, blow him off like that? Why would they blow him off if they had nothing to sell him in terms of internet service? So he wants to use dial-up internet over a landline phone connection. What's the big deal? There is no DSL out there, and there's no Uverse in that town. They have nothing to offer him that they could have upsold him to. All they had to do was send a service tech to check the darn copper. So I really don't understand what the story is with that. But that sent him barreling into the welcoming arms, malicious arms, I might add, of the local cable monopoly, who is now socking him to the tune of $50-something a month for probably their standard package, because the starter package, at a quarter of the speed, they sell 60 megs down. The starter package is 15 megs down, more in line with what I get from Frontier as the underdog ISP over here, where it's more built up, but I digress. No doubt, he was upsold to the $50-something a month 60 meg down package because the starter package with 15 down is only a couple dollars less per month. Now, this is exactly what the problem is with this cable monopoly, and this is a perfect example of what's wrong with broadband in America and why dial-up is even still a thing, because these ISPs don't want to sell broadband service at any speed at an affordable price. They just want to sell you whatever the latest greatest is, or, well, at least in their eyes what the latest greatest is. We all know what the latest greatest internet is. In South Korea, 10 gigabits or something like that, whatever they're up to nowadays. What's SK Telecom doing in Seoul these days? No, nothing in the U.S. is even going to touch that, except maybe EPB Fiber in Chattanooga, or Google Fiber, or anything fiber. You get my drift. Maybe something from Sonic.net out on the West Coast. I don't know. But anyways, we know what the latest greatest is. But what these companies are trying to do is like, this is the latest greatest technology. Even though it's the latest and greatest to them and to you, if you don't know that the United States is lagging behind the rest of the developed world in broadband deployment. It's pitiful. Even former Soviet republics are rolling out better broadband options in their cities than we are. What did we win the Cold War for? The former commies now have better internet. Whatever. So you consider $50-something a month for 60 megs down for a former dial-up user who doesn't even get what broadband can do just yet. He's still using it just for email and stuff like that. Poking around maybe a website or two. He's still using it like dial-up and, oh yeah, I'm getting ripped off. You don't say. When you're not making any use of the expanded multimedia capabilities of broadband internet, you think it's a ripoff? You think? But we'll get to that. But here's the thing. Now, yeah, he is kind of getting ripped off because no doubt he was upsold to the 60 down package because the so-called starter package is terrible. But what if this cable company had sold that internet at fair rates based on the speed? That starter package would be $15 a month versus $10 for AOL. Dial-up would be gone if ISPs would do something even that rudimentary. But does that happen? No. Affordable tiers get eliminated. Affordable provisioning speeds get eliminated. And I have seen this firsthand with what AT&T did before they hand off to Frontier. Rewind the clock back to when I first started playing around with SBC Yahoo DSL. Over 10 years ago, when the fastest speed was 3 megs down. Ooh, 3 megs. The DSL speeds in the early 2000s started at 384K a second because 128 was ISDN. that was something else entirely, but proper DSL, as it was introduced to me, started at 384 kilobits per second down. So by the time I was getting into the broadband market after college, that tier had been eliminated. So AT&T's first tier was $7.68 down for $20 a month. Notice, AOL cut their membership fee for the basic package from $20 to $10 a month for dial-up. And when I was getting out of my own and I was shopping for broadband, because if I had to pick between pay TV and broadband was the clear winner. I went out and looked at the packages, and the slowest DSL was $20 a month. Then it went up. As you went up through the tiers, you paid $10 more a month per tier. Did AT&T keep that? No, they didn't. They dropped the more affordable stuff. By the time I left my old hometown last year, which only had old school DSL available unless you wanted to get socked by the cable company, in certain parts of town only, my part of town, but not where my folks live, they were down to a royal ripoff of 3 megs down for low 40s and 6 megs down for high 40s per month. Yeah. That's how broadband works in America. Slow, expensive, not enough competition, and this is what we get. So, over the span of a decade, the affordable broadband that could have given someone a connection and not been dial-up was eliminated, and the cable company followed suit, upgrading to DOCSIS 2, DOCSIS 3, upgrading their entry-level speed from 10 to 25 to 60 megs down, but the more affordable tiers and lower provisioning speeds don't stick around. And you know why they're doing this? Because they can. Because if you have an affordable tier, people are going to flock to it. Because, oh, look, it's affordable, let's get it. And I guess they don't want to go for volume sales. It's got to be some kind of average revenue per consumer nonsense, but this feeds into the problems with lack of competition here in the U.S. So here's my dad complaining because he's paying $50-something a month for internet after the phone company blew him off and wouldn't fix his dial-up for him, which, by the way, would break fax machines, too, if anybody's trying to use a fax machine that far out in the woods. But so while he's paying for a broadband package way faster than what I have because it's all that's available, the opportunity to kill dial-up is there. But are the providers ever going to go for it? Probably not. What compelling reason do they have to not nickel and dime people into oblivion with internet access like that? Then there's my dad himself coming over from dial-up, not realizing that the reason why my generation is becoming the cord cutter generation is because you can make video entertainment work with broadband pretty easily if you don't mind waiting for certain things. But what do you do with what do you do with pay TV? You have a DVR, or in his case, he still uses VCRs. And you fill up the DVR and you fall behind on things with the DVR, just like you can fall behind on stuff with a VCR. So you can end up with channels that you're not getting around to watching, shows you're not getting around to watching, the works. And he's had the old VCR version of that before as well. I've seen him frustrated because he never seemed to catch up on shows that he was recording with his VCRs. I had the same experience with DVRs as well. So you figure if you're behind anyways, what's the point? Just go to Netflix and watch everything in season sets at a time or something like that when it gets released or something along those lines. Or use YouTube as the world's VCR. Or look at some indie content like what I do, or Bad Drivers of Connecticut, or the Roadkill Show from Motor Trend's channel, which is actually set up kind of like a television show with how it flows, so to speak. The biggest thing still on pay TV? Sports, at least for now. There are some major sports events, though, that are finding their way online and being streamed in addition to their television broadcasting as well. However, sports are like the last holdout, especially with really high HD and stuff like that, seeing those football players look real on the screen or something like that. So really high intense sports is the last bastion of what pay TV has in terms of concentrated coolness. For other stuff, the internet has more than enough options available to not even need the subscription. This is how I wound up in a situation where, even during the cable nightmare, when I had free courtesy service, the free service with hundreds of channels I still wasn't watching enough to justify the cost, even when it was free. But that's the thing. So here's a guy who's formerly a dial-up person. He's using broadband like it's still dial-up and complaining about how expensive it is. Okay. He's got to quit with this arbitrary nonsense known as the generation gap. Living room computing has become a thing. I can build a computer that looks like a very old VCR, maybe even a Betamax player with what some of the cases look like these days. I mean, this whole idea of the computer being in an office all the time, not the case. Living room computing is a thing. I don't know what it's going to take to catch this guy up, though. I do have an extra router, so I can hook him up with some wireless. But here's the thing. We've already talked about this before, and despite all the complaining, he still doesn't want to switch over to a laptop and go use Wi-Fi in a library or something. I guess the idea of stopping somewhere after work to use the internet is still a foreign idea to him, but what have we become in this country? Look at the situation that he's in, with how the cable monopoly is now fleecing him like this. Even if he were to watch the video stuff, he'd have to convince my stepmother to drop the pay TV in order to make it more affordable that way. But even if he was able to do that, I mean, look at the situation that he's in. That it's a viable option for him to have to go somewhere to use the internet. I know poorer countries with internet cafes that charge by the hour or by the minute, that's more of a thing. But here in the U.S., where we have jokes about Al Gore back in the day, ooh, Al Gore invented the internet. This kind of, the internet started out as a military project after World War II here in this country, and this is the state that it's in nowadays. Pitiful and absolutely inexcusable. Lack of competition, revolving door lobbyists, you name it, it is all added up to broadband being a total disaster in this country. And what a thing for me to see after seeing just how fundamental this technology is to our lifestyles here in this 21st century. It is this century's electricity. Much like how electrical service was a luxury until finally some public programs made affordable rural electricity a standard, we're seeing the exact same thing with broadband. The private sector is sticking largely to the cities, maybe, and trying to just nickel and dime as much as they can out of such a basic service. I mean, can you live offline? I mean, when even job applications require you to go somewhere to hook up to the internet? This is what we've sunk to with this technology. And I'm very, very sorry I even have to talk about it in this tone. But it is that bad. Here's a guy that just wants to not be the only person who's not online in the family again, and he now has to get socked with expensive cable internet because the cable company doesn't know what an affordable tier is or doesn't want to provide one. Inexcusable. Okay, enough blowing off the chores. And after how depressing this discussion got, the chores are suddenly seeming a lot more appealing than they were earlier. This is Multimedia J, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.